Vijay, so great to have you on the podcast here today. How are you?
Thank you, Jared. I am great. I'm really excited to chat today.
Likewise. We launched this show a few months ago. We've had some great guests. Excited to add you into the pool as well. Um, let's dig right in. First off, if you could tell the audience a little bit about your background, and then we'll talk about your company, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, that sounds great. I'll start with me. I'm the Field Chief Technology Officer at Scale AI. And at Scale AI, we're really the leading data intelligence company for building AI. So I'll spend some time talking about what we do, our background, and the work that we do in order to making more trustworthy AI models. But for me, my journey in AI really started back in the early days of YouTube. I was one of the first machine learning engineers there working on search and discovery problems. And my team helped build recommended videos on YouTube. So the 20 videos that you see on the right-hand side. We learned a lot about how AI could be used to transform how people find great content, how people explore the world around them, and really see the benefits in terms of people being able to discover and explore things that they didn't expect through video. After YouTube, I spent time doing my own startup, and then I spent time at Apple leading a machine learning team there. A lot of our work there was thinking about how people could use their iPhones or Apple Watches or other Apple devices and just do more with this technology using AI to help them understand what their phone was capable of doing. And so it's a great opportunity to kind of learn about how this technique could be used, leveraging a lot of data that people need to keep private or personal, but could still be used to power really transformative experiences. So now at Scale, our work is really building the data engine for building the future of AI. And it's really foundational work that's important to the future of this technology, which in my personal opinion is maybe the most transformative technology that we've ever faced, dealt with, or trying to incorporate into things that can make the human experience better. If you think about three different components of how AI models are trained, one component is really the hardware layer, the compute that goes into building these models. You know a lot about this through companies like NVIDIA. They are pushing things forward with brand new chips and data centers and opportunities to scale up how these models are built. The second big piece would probably be the algorithms. So, leading companies like OpenAI that we work with, Meta, they are creating larger and more diverse models that can be trained in order to address new types of problems, like being able to work with computers, or being able to answer search questions. But the third really fundamental piece is the data that goes into training AI. And we're the leader in understanding how that data needs to be evaluated, how it needs to be passed in a way that the models can understand how to leverage it best. And that makes a big difference in having models that give more reliable, trustworthy answers when you ask them questions. So what that means can mean a model that more accurately answers a question about world facts or things that have an objective answer to them. It can also mean a model that on subjective or creative questions is better able to work with humans. A model that maybe assists someone that's in a education job, maybe as like a mentor or a teacher, better understand how a student should be understanding biology or chemistry or other questions. The ability to work with humans is kind of at the core of how this technology is progressing. And a lot of the data work that we do helps this technology work better with humans, whether they're experts or students, anyone that's trying to expand their horizons by using AI.
Now, at Scale AI, you've mentioned it, you're working a lot on improving data for these AI models. So my question for you is, how do you balance data quality versus quantity as the models get larger?
Yeah, that's a great question. So both of those are important, both quality and quantity. Quality for us really means the ability for the models to answer questions more reliably. And that can mean having data from trustworthy, authoritative sources. It can mean examples of how the models should give more authoritative outputs in areas where people expect that. For example, if you're asking the model a medical question or a question about science, you might ask the model to give you an answer based upon published medical research, or maybe what's the cutting edge in the field that you're interested in. Maybe it's an engineering question and you want to know, exactly how do I answer this question given all sorts of tools and other things that I could use in the back end in order to answer it. So we use a lot of what's called expert feedback in order to answer questions in those sort of domains. We might use like a legal expert to help understand how the model can answer a legal question, maybe answer that question differently here in the US versus how you'd answer that question in Europe or in Singapore or in another country where the laws are very different. Legal experts are they know how to think about these problems and they know how to structure their thinking. We're trying to train the model to do similar work, to not just jump to an answer or a conclusion and give an off the cuff response, but really structure how they think about what they're being asked to do, what sort of resources they can use to answer that question, and how they can go about solving it. But quantity is also important. And so we're trying to find new ways to leverage just vast amount of data that's out there to train the model. And one interesting problem there is that even though most of the models that we use today from OpenAI and Meta and others have been trained on what's called public data, so data that's been published on websites or is available on the internet for everyone to use, there's actually a huge amount of data that's considered private data. So this might be data that's stored at a large bank or an insurance company. It might be data in an education context that's on students and questions that students have asked that they don't necessarily want published on the open internet. So we've become one of the leaders in leveraging this vast amount of private data that's out there that needs to be kept private, using that in order to build AI experiences that really address longstanding problems that students or customers have faced, and do that in a way that preserves the privacy of that data and the security of that data, so it doesn't leak out of those areas where it's really important to keep that secure.
In doing research before this episode, this is in no way related to I mean, you'll probably be able to relate it to Scale AI, but question I wanted to ask you, based on, it seems a lot of people have this question: why is it just so hard though to evaluate these AI models properly?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you're actually asking something that now increasingly the world's best researchers are asking us. So it's not a silly question by any means. It's definitely one of the most important questions that we get asked. Yeah. So, I think when these models first came out and when ChatGPT was first launched, this technology felt so new and so different that people didn't really know how to evaluate it. In fact, the best way to do it might be just to consider what we call vibes. Like, you just start chatting with the model, you see how it feels, what sort of answers it gives. Do those answers make sense to you? Did it understand the question that you were asking the model, or did it get confused in between? And that was a really good check about how the models were progressing. But then we started to explore how those models could answer more sophisticated questions. Let's say a math or statistics question. And in that area, there's usually an objective answer to how you could answer that question. But you need to understand all the nuances of, like, how did you ask the model the question? Did you ask in the right way? Did you give the model enough time to think about what the answer could be? Could the model use all sorts of tools? Like, for example, if you're asking a math question, could the model use a calculator to solve some of the arithmetic that's behind that question, and just give you more accurate answers or results? So that led to a lot of work going into building more realistic evals that could test how the models were performing. But today we're seeing, as the models have progressed and become much more sophisticated, they've started to do what's called saturating the old eval. And saturate just means they've kind of reached such a good level of performance on some of the old evals that it's no longer really measuring anything as you're testing the newer generation models. If you already know that models can get 99% of the answers on a test right, it doesn't really make that much of a difference if a model gets you 98 or 100. It's just kind of random variation whether that's happening. So we're starting to see more sophisticated evals being built that are using a lot of the new capabilities of these models. And this includes the ability maybe to just reach out and use a computer or use a website in order to do something on behalf of a human being. Can you trust the model enough to go and book a flight reservation for you if you tell the model, hey, I need to fly to Tampa on a Tuesday evening? Or is the model going to get confused halfway in between and book you the wrong flight, maybe a flight back to Boston? Those sort of things are really good evaluation checks that now, as we're using models for more tricky human-oriented things, we need to be able to test how the models are performing and which models are doing better than the older models at being more accurate at those sort of tests.
But those examples you just mentioned, a human can make mistakes on all of those, right? I told you I made the mistake with my flight. And in many cases, I guess when you look at it, would one of these models make mistakes less than that's kind of what we have to look at too, right? Will they make less mistakes than, we had someone on recently that they were like, stop calling it hallucinations, call it an error, because that's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
A hallucination is if it would be like a human, and it's not. Because there's also a big question of how many of us say please and thank you to the model that we're talking to, or like,
Yeah.
but it's hard to get away from that because, like, especially now with the voice mode and some of these setups, right? Just so human like when you're having the conversation, it's hard to not say thank you, appreciate it.
Yep.
Anyway,
Yeah, it's the $1 million question right now is when do you get superhuman performance of the model? And it means different things to different people. So you're right, as humans, we all make mistakes booking travel. You know, it's going to happen to you eventually. If you travel enough, you're going to go to the wrong airport or you're going to be at the wrong time. But ultimately, our judgment should be that these AI models are able to help humans because they're able to do better than even an expert at that task is able to do it. And so one of the things we're doing at Scale is actually pushing the bar forward at eval so far that we're starting to think about tasks that almost no human on the planet would be able to do. And we have an effort called Humanity's Last Exam, which would be a set of tasks where if you have a PhD in a field, let's say you have a PhD in biology, you spent all day thinking about this problem and researching the ways you could solve it, you could maybe get to the right answer. But then you could go and ask an AI model, and maybe in the next year or 2 years, the AI model could just give you an answer in 30 minutes and get you the right answer. That'll be kind of the final exam that judges whether we're going to ask all of these questions more towards human experts, or we're going to start leaning on models because the models are able to catch up to what those human experts do. And that'll be a really interesting turning point for how we think about this technology.
super interesting. Another thing I wanted to ask is, people keep asking me, why do we just have so many different models now, right? It seems like they keep popping up. How do you continue, like with Scale AI, how do you continue to adapt to support these new models?
Yeah.
Because like you go on vacation for 2 weeks and come back, there's going to be some new news that you're walking into, right? But like, how do you continue to adapt at Scale AI to work with these different models?
Yeah, this is an important part of the story about data. And, you know, first place I'll say is we have a huge range of different customers that are using AI today. You know, we have folks that are using it to build consumer applications like booking travel. But we also have folks that are using it to build enterprise applications, which could be, you know, a bank needing to understand how to track fraud quicker than maybe someone that's trying to break into their systems. Or it could be a healthcare company trying to understand how to better serve its patients in a given region. It's also the US government and governments around the world. They're trying to understand how to talk to their citizens and give them better services. AI is just a transformative technology for how governments are going to work as well. So one of the reasons why you're seeing a huge range of models is some of those models are good for different use cases that are going to come out there. There might be different patterns that you see different customers need around that private data. And that private data is ultimately like the lifeblood of each of these organizations. You know, if you are a big department store and you have a website that people go to buy things for the holidays, maybe there's a customer support chatbot you could deploy there. But ultimately, all the data that goes into that customer support giving you the right answer to a holiday shopping question, both comes from like your catalog, all the products that you have on your site. And it also comes from your history of how you talk to your customers, because all the best department stores are the ones that are known to go above and beyond when a customer asks them a question. You know, they might suggest just the right thoughtful gift, or they might help you with the returns on a gift that isn't working well. You need to leverage all of that data about how you talk to your customers in order to make that model the best model it can be. So we see a lot of our customers choose the model to start with based upon their ability to get that model to the state that they need it to be in order to have the best possible experience for their customers to leverage. Ultimately, that's a data question, how you understand how your organization's talked to its customers in the past, how it can use everything in its catalog to best meet a customer's needs, and then surface that at the right time in order for the customer to have a great experience.
We think through, like, let's talk from your lens. You know, what are the biggest challenges that you're seeing companies face when actually trying to use AI? And then really how, I mean, you've already mentioned ways that you're helping them, but like, if you want to continue on to that, like how Scale AI is helping them solve these biggest challenges. I know pieces of that have been said throughout this conversation already, but yeah, just like, what are the biggest challenges that you see companies face when actually using and implementing AI?
Yeah, of course. A great example, we just launched last week a partnership that we have with Time. So Time Magazine publishes the CEO of the year, the athlete of the year. And this year they launched the person of the year last week, which was Donald Trump, you know, the former and next president of the United States. So we partnered with Time on making that more of a generative AI experience than just the pages in the magazine alone. So it's an experience where you can ask questions, you can probe deeper into what that article in the interview with President Trump said. You could start to explore imagery and other things that might be really relevant to making that something personal to you, rather than just reading the same story about the person of the year that everyone else is reading. And that's been really kind of a new entry into generative AI being used for journalism and media. How can you build something really personal that connects to people, where they are and what they want to learn about things that are happening in the news? That's ultimately the goal that all of us have with the media, is to not just all have this one size fit all broadcast, but instead have this really personal experience that's custom tailored to what we need to know for our own lives. So our work with Time really focused on how can we build the best generative AI experience around media and journalism possible? How can we give accurate and nuanced and insightful answers to the questions that readers and viewers have? But also there's a security angle to that as well. So, we know that people will come in and try to break that experience in ways that can maybe be embarrassing for any organization or company. And so we have to think about hardening all of the experiences that we share with readers first. And that really means a lot of look into what can go wrong, what are ways where someone might get a answer that's inaccurate, that doesn't say what the journalist originally intended to say, or doesn't say what the interview source originally intended. What are ways where you can mislead people about what the experience says? And how can you stay ahead of that? How can you always jump ahead of this game of how people are trying to really kind of break into generative AI and do things that are unexpected? And so much of that really is the cutting edge of the work that we do. It's security first, taking that mindset rather than just waiting and seeing what's going to happen.
It was funny. Even a few months back, when you look at even summarizing certain pieces of news, and there would be quotes within it, and the model would make up a quote for the person. Like, I'm glad we're getting past that, because it was pretty funny, like, a lot of times what the quote would be, because sometimes it would be so far off from what they would actually say. And it's incredible to see, like, how the models have progressed. I did see that Time that was like big news, the Time magazine, right? That you guys worked with them on that.
Yeah.
Super cool. It also is kind of signaling, like, what you're doing with them there. People just aren't, like, you can't get that experience off a hard copy of that magazine, right? And I mean, we've kind of been there for a while in terms of, like, people going for the virtual option over the hard copy. But I mean, you want to hang
It's a
your
great
hard
example.
copy, though, right? You would hang your hard copy up if you were on the cover.
Yeah, it's a great example where Jessica Sibley, the CEO of Time, got together with our CEO, Alexander Wang, and they really said, how can we push this experience forward? The hard copy is always going to be there. There's always going to be the kind of the printed version of this interview. But what people are looking for is the future of, like, how does this make sense to me? I have my own concerns about the incoming administration, about where the state of the world's going. How can you connect with me as a human being? And that's what generative AI makes possible. And what we've built here at Scale is the opportunity to understand what human beings want to get out of this technology, and how you can go about accomplishing that without having to jump through the most hoops that possible to get there.
When you look ahead, what's one AI trend that you think will have the biggest or let's not call it just a trend, because a trend kind of comes and goes. Let's call it an advancement. Mm-hmm. What's one AI advancement you think will have the biggest impact over the next several years?
Yeah, the term you're going to hear a lot this year in 2025 is whether we've hit the data wall. And the wall is a bad thing. It would mean that we've kind of slowed down what we could do when we're developing AI. And we've spent a lot of time talking about what that means. So when people talk about a data wall, they mean a lot of the models that are out there have been trained on what's publicly available on the internet. And if you think back over the last couple of years, sites like anyone that's building a search engine, or anyone that's asking questions about what's there on the internet, they've probably gathered all of the data that's available there in order to train the models. But where we see a lot of progress happening and how you break through that wall is doing a lot of work using human data and using private data that enterprises have, opportunities to really push things forward beyond just what's available on the public internet. So what that might mean is, like, if you're asking a question about a medical issue, rather than relying upon this data that's on the public internet, which could be medical articles, but it could also be, a Reddit post or a social media post that someone did on that. There might be parts of that post that are accurate, but parts that maybe, misunderstood what's going on. You could actually rely upon medical experts to help guide how that model should be thinking about the answer, and come up with a more sophisticated answer, which might mean the model doesn't jump to a conclusion, give you an answer in 2 seconds. It might stop and think for like 15 or 20 seconds. It might walk through multiple different scenarios about how it could answer your question. But at the end, you get a much more sophisticated answer, the sort of answer that you'd expect from people that have a background in medicine to give you. So we're pushing towards that future. That's kind of how you push through the data wall, is leveraging all of this human experience, all of this private data, and using that in order to build a much better experience for humans than what you just get with the public internet.
Yeah, and then us as humans need to be okay with waiting a second or two, versus we want everything instantaneous when we ask a question. But would you wait a little bit longer to have a more substantial response, right? We're starting to see it now, like these models that, what's it called? Was it O1 preview?
Mm-hmm.
Like the answer is so much better when it actually has time to think about it.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have to ask the follow-up question too, right? That's a big deal.
Right.
It'll be interesting to see how it progresses. But do you think we'll start to see, though, because you said, worry around hitting the data wall? It seems like we're getting so many updates with these models. Will we see is it likely we'll see a decrease, though, in the speed at which these models are being updated moving forward? Is that possible?
I don't think so. One of the challenges, though, is we need really good evaluations of how the models are improving. It's one thing to say, hey, I released this fancy new model and go try it out. And then, a few people say, hey, this looks better than another model. Other people say, no, this doesn't seem that much better. Instead, you need really high quality evaluations of how the models are performing on the sort of tasks that we're asking them to do. So, some sort of tasks, yes, a human being would expect an answer really quickly if you're just talking to a chatbot. But the sort of things we're seeing with agents, where you're actually asking the model to go and book that flight reservation for you, or go and maybe use your computer and help you figure out, how do I, edit this video on my behalf and do 10 different things to the video before I publish it to my website. You might expect to wait, 2 minutes or 3 minutes, just given editing a video takes a long time. And so you'd be very happy if that could be done in 3 minutes. But we need to build evaluations over what's the model doing during that time period. How is it understanding your request? How is it looking at the video? How is it figuring out what it wants to do with it? Those sort of opportunities to build better evaluations will help us understand how these more sophisticated models are going to perform in the future.
I think we need to be open to even taking longer on certain things. Like if there was a task that took an hour or two and it takes a couple minutes now, like not even just like getting it to the seconds, isn't that a win? So
Oh, yeah.
It'll be interesting to see how a lot of these applications, like the interfaces and things, change too, because obviously, if it's happening in the background, I don't need to necessarily have a screen that's showing me until the task is actually done. I had a good conversation with it was first episode we had was James Courier from NFX.
Mm-hmm.
And he was just talking about how one of the things he's really excited about is just all these different interfaces. Like we can kind of rethink how things should be structured. And then I've been seeing a bunch of people say this about email and
Mm-hmm.
where email could head with, does it need to look the same way as it always has? So it'll be interesting. And there'll be a lot of failed experiments along the way, right? But I think we'll have some really cool applications that come out of all of this.
Yeah, a lot of the most important stuff that human beings do, we take our time to do it. For example, we work with folks in the financial services sector, folks like Global Atlantic Financial Group, Boston Consulting Group that does a lot of organizational work. If you're thinking about figuring out whether someone should get a mortgage loan for a new house they want to buy, you're okay not getting an answer in 2 seconds. You should probably take a couple hours, maybe even a couple of days to think through all the data that's available on this market, on that house, on the person that's applying for the loan or the family. And you should make sure you're able to document all the work that goes into that. For those more sophisticated decisions that require a lot more thinking and then ultimately human oversight, so the ability to review the decisions the AI model made, we're seeing a lot of interest in building out more sophisticated evaluations, better documentation, And really what we spend time also talking about with the US government, other governments, is responsible deployment of AI. So making sure you're not just jumping to deploying a model without understanding how that model comes up with decisions it is, but instead asking the model to document step by step, this was the data that I used. This is where I maybe ran into a wall trying to get that data. This is the consequence for the ultimate decision that I made. And this is how I explained it to humans that are going to review that decision. All those are really important pieces of the puzzle to make more sophisticated use of this technology.
I love it. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for being a guest. I can't wait for future chats, and I'll be cheering you and your team on from the sidelines because I love what you continue to do. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you, Jared. Really excited to chat and excited for the future.